guys, welcome to another episode of Cryptids and Cases. I hope all of you are doing super well. If not, I do hope that things get better. Maybe this episode can be a bit of a distraction if you're going through it a little bit. Also, pardon my voice. It's a little bit low and a little bit scratchy, but I also feel like I just can't be super loud and animated when there's other people in my house. I don't know what it is. I get like podcast shy if there's someone else here. I don't want them to overhear me doing this. I don't know why. It's just way too embarrassing. I wish that I had like my own soundproof studio that I could just be loud and boisterous and ridiculous, but that's not the vibe currently. Anyway, I was debating on what case to do for this episode because I was actually pretty tied between two of them. The first one and the one that I decided on is an older case, but it's also one that I've never heard about. The second was the case of the 4 Idaho murders that occurred a few years ago. I decided to go for the case we'll talk about here first for a few reasons. I'm definitely interested in covering the case of the Idaho murders, but what do you guys think? Is that case just way too covered? I feel like everyone and their goldfish was reporting on that case as it was happening and being investigated. I saw it on loads of podcasts and YouTube videos and articles. So is that case just way too saturated, or would you like to hear my report and my take on it regardless? I know there's a few of you who just listen to this because it's me and you're being supportive and you don't really run in the true crime scene. So there's a lot of you that haven't heard about it, but I'm not sure. Feel free to let me know what you think on any of my social media pages on Facebook, Twitter/X, or Instagram. Now, I found our case today really head-turning and unique. It's also a little spooky and definitely has a resolution that was reached by means I have never heard of before. What case is it, you ask? Actually, you probably aren't asking that. You can read the title of this episode, but just humor me for a minute. Today, we'll cover the case of Teresita Basa. Teresita Basa was born in the Philippines in 1929. Her parents were successful in business and she was their only child. She had a nice, typical upbringing with a comfortable lifestyle and really immersed herself in music, specifically loving the piano. While in the Philippines, she attended Assumption College San Lorenzo in Manila, graduating with a bachelor's degree. She really wanted to find a job in music, as it was her passion, but unfortunately, at the time, there just wasn't anything sustainable that she could do with her skill in the Philippines. Try as she might through her 20s, she just wasn't able to find a viable career path that centered around music and the piano. Eventually, in her 30s, she made the decision to move to the United States in order to pursue a master's in music. Teresita was very studious and insistent when it came to her education, so she was really excited to expand her horizons with her master's in a different country. Her parents and her friends in the Philippines were very supportive of her studies and career path, and that made the transition a lot easier. She settled down in Chicago, but despite getting her master's in music, she just still couldn't manage to find a job that could sustain her in that field. Eventually, she found a job at a hospital and began climbing the medical ladder instead, which had a better promise of pay and that sustainability. After plenty of hard work, she secured a job at Chicago's Edgewater Hospital as a respiratory therapist and really thrived in that career. Now, despite having moved to a different career path, Teresita didn't want to give up her love for music, so she began teaching piano lessons, free of cost, and decided to go back to school to get a PhD in music. I'll tell you now, she must have had way better time management than I do because along with all of that she had going on, she also started a band called the Mahogany 5+1, which consisted of 4 Filipino members as well as a Polish drummer. She also enjoyed gardening as a hobby when she had some free time, which probably wasn't super often. Despite Teresita having her hands in a lot of different areas, her friends and colleagues remembered her as being very quiet and unassuming. She was intelligent, yet humble, and also very independent, as she wasn't ever known to really have a boyfriend, though she did have a few platonic friendships. She lived on her own and was doing the thing and seemed well liked, determined, and successful. Things, however, wouldn't always be music, school, and hard work for Teresita. And if things ended happily for her, then she wouldn't be featured in this episode. Instead, matters took a drastic turn on February 21st, 1977, when Teresita was just 48 years old. Early in the morning, one of the fire departments in Chicago responded to a call that smoke could be seen coming from the Pine Grove apartment building. Firefighters were quick to respond and ascended 15 flights of stairs before reaching Teresita's door, which appeared to be the source of the smoke. The firefighters did what they had to do. They broke into the apartment in order to contain the fire and see if there was anyone inside that needed help. At this point, fortunately, the fire hadn't spread too far and it was mostly in the living room. And it seemed to be coming from a mattress that had been oddly placed in the middle of the floor there. That would immediately make me tilt my head because, one, why is there a mattress in the middle of the living room? And two, there didn't seem to be anybody home. This clearly wasn't an electrical fire or a forgotten candle because, again, the fire originated from this mattress. So how had that even happened? It also didn't seem that someone had just run in, set the fire, and left as some sort of weird, invasive arson either, because the door had been locked. The firefighters made quick work of putting out the fire, which thankfully didn't affect any other apartment, and noticed that there seemed to be something under the mattress. The mattress wasn't laying flat on the ground, and as it burned down, it revealed a mass that was inside of it. They turned the mattress over, and what they discovered under that mattress left them shocked. There, lying on the floor, was the naked form of a woman with a knife plunged through her chest. The knife seemed to be a large butcher knife and had struck the woman in such a manner that they determined it had probably been the cause of her death, not the fire. Her clothes had also been placed in a pile on top of her body. I found it shocking that whoever had killed her had left the knife within her chest. Usually, it's most common practice for a killer to try and hide or discard the murder weapon because it can lead to all sorts of clues, such as fingerprints. Yet, they had just left it there. When investigators arrived on the scene, it was evident that the killer had attempted to hide her body by placing it under the mattress and then lighting it on fire. I guess it was assumed that the fire would burn all of it away, but they vastly underestimated how fast the fire department would show up and contain the fire. Due to the woman being unclothed, they assumed that she had been sexually assaulted, but other than her state of undress, there was actually no proof to back that being the case when the autopsy was performed. It was almost as if the scene had been staged to look like an assault without actually being one. Now, it has been recorded in other cases where victims have been undressed but not sexually assaulted, and it has been something that killers do to embarrass their victims. It's kind of a last-ditch effort at humiliation. You'd assume that that would be a very personal thing, that someone who wanted to go to that length to humiliate a victim to that degree would have to be personally scorned by that victim at some point and super angry. But Teresita led a quiet life and she didn't seem to have any enemies. It didn't take long for investigators to conclude the identity of the woman to be Teresita Basa, thanks to contacting her apartment and figuring out who lived in that unit. Those detectives that were looking into the case began to get more and more stumped as they asked about Teresita and what kind of person she was, because again, she was well liked. She hadn't gotten mixed up in any shady businesses. She was pretty quiet. She didn't have any crazy ex-boyfriends or ex-friends. She was just an average woman living a hardworking but typical lifestyle. Police had noticed that the apartment appeared to be very ransacked and thrown around in a manner that Teresita would have never left it. Instead of a personal attack with a vendetta to back it, They wondered if maybe it had been a robbery of some sort. What made that theory a little tricky, though, was that it didn't appear after searching that the culprit had stolen anything of value. Her more expensive belongings were actually still in the apartment, some discarded here and there. Another observation that was made, as I briefly mentioned, was that the apartment door was locked when firefighters arrived. This led investigators to potentially believe that Teresita might have known the person who killed her and let them into her apartment because they were a familiar face. Still, there were no other facts to point toward the identity of the killer. The only evidence that potentially pointed to answers besides the knife that investigators found was a notepad that had the message, "Get theater tickets for AS," written in Teresita's handwriting. Investigators tried their best to figure out who AS was. They asked her coworkers and family and friends, and no one seemed familiar with those initials. They also didn't find any answers as to why she would be buying theater tickets or for what show. She hadn't spoken of those plans to anyone, or at least if she had, it wasn't notable enough for anyone to remember. It seemed that one of the few clues and pieces of evidence that they found was quickly leading to a dead end. One friend's recounting of events did strike the police as interesting, though. This friend, named Ruth Loeb, said that the night Teresita had been killed, they'd had a 30-minute conversation over the phone. Teresita had mentioned that a man was coming over to visit her later that night, but she didn't mention a name, and Ruth didn't seem to think that he was coming over for a date or anything romantic. Unfortunately, once again, as it seems to be going, that lead did not turn up any more information. Police couldn't find any answers as to who had come over and why. Things looked pretty bleak for Teresita's case and remained that way until August of that year, roughly 6 months after Teresita had been killed. Joseph Stachula and Lee Eplin, who were the two detectives on the case, received a call from the husband of one of Teresita's coworkers. The coworker was a woman by the name of Remy Chua, who happened to also be a respiration therapist like Teresita. She was also from the Philippines, though she had grown up in a different city than Teresita had. The two weren't necessarily close friends. They had what I would say is a pretty typical relationship between coworkers. They spoke in passing here and there, and at one point, Remy had attended a get-together that Teresita hosted for her coworkers at her apartment, but their relationship really didn't go much deeper than that. Still, Remy had been disturbed by the news of Teresita's demise. On the call, her husband, Dr. Jose Chua, had some really jarring information for the investigators. He said that his wife had been visited on regular occasions by Teresita in her dreams. He said that she had dreamt of her for months, actually, and this had began shortly after Teresita's death. Initially, Remy kind of wrote it off and didn't think much of it. Though they weren't super close, the death of a coworker is going to be a little bit shocking to anybody, and dreaming of someone that you knew in some capacity after their death really isn't that crazy. Now, getting a little bit deeper past dreams, Remy informed detectives that at one point, she had been taking a nap at the hospital between shifts and swore that she had seen Teresita's spirit. She mentions that she didn't seem to do anything. She just stood there and watched her. Remy wasn't sure if she was dreaming at that point or not, but she said that it felt so real. Allegedly, 3 other coworkers said that they had seen Teresita's spirit, but they chose to not come forward. Eventually, though, Jose told investigators that the dreams had gotten so regular that he had to give her sedatives in order for her to sleep. This is where I need you to hold on for a second, sit down or grab a nearby table, prepare yourself, because when I heard this part of the case, I wasn't quite sure how to feel. I was floored and confused and skeptical and in awe somehow, all at the same time. Jose claimed that Teresita had not only visited his wife in dreams, but recently her spirit had started to possess her. Yeah, you heard me right. Teresita herself was entering the body of Jose's wife. As I said, initially, I was pretty shocked by that, but then I began to get my skeptical hat on because that is obviously quite a claim. I read on, and guys, I really don't have an explanation to debunk this. According to Jose, things started rather slow. He noticed that his wife Remy had begun to mimic some of Teresita's interests and mannerisms. She began to grow a big interest in music and even began to use Teresita's locker at work and sit in the spot that Teresita always chose in the hospital cafeteria. She became really paranoid and stressed at her job, and ultimately, she was fired from her position, which really shocked her husband. It just was not like her at all. Jose recalled that one of the first times that he had noticed this apparent possession was when Remy was at home taking a nap. Jose had noticed his wife moving around in her sleep. She seemed to be having a nightmare, so he asked her if she was okay. She responded in Tagalog. Now, while Remy and her husband both spoke the language and were familiar with it due to her being from the Philippines, Jose mentioned that his wife never spoke the language at home. It was very rare that she used it at all, so responding to him in it was very out of the ordinary. She also seemed to be speaking in a different tone, and the voice didn't sound like hers. Jose reported that what she did respond with was, translated to English, "Doctor, I'd like to ask for your help. The man who murdered me is still at large." This wasn't all that was said, though. Jose says that he spoke to her for around 30 minutes and began to ask her questions such as, "Who are you? And what's going on?" I'm sure that he was super freaked out. I can't blame him. I'm also shocked that he managed to have a 30-minute conversation because I feel like for me, at the 5-minute mark, I would be down the street. He recalls that Remy still seemed to be sleeping while she was talking, but it was almost this trance like state more than it resembled true sleep. When he asked who she was, his wife responded with, "I am Teresita Basa," and told him to not be afraid. Jose said that he didn't know who Teresita was at the time. Though he was a doctor, he didn't work with his wife and Teresita, and of course, since his wife and Teresita weren't really super close, it also makes sense that he wouldn't have ever heard mention of her. In the 30-minute conversation, the supposed spirit also dropped quite a bombshell. She said that the person responsible for her murder was a man by the name of Alan Showery. The spirit of Teresita reportedly pleaded with Jose to go to the police with the information that she told him to help her solve her case and get justice served. Soon after the conversation, Remy herself seemed to wake up, and she had no recollection of anything that had happened over the last 30 minutes. Jose questioned her about the conversation and everything that was said, and she had no idea what he was talking about. Despite the situation being completely bizarre, both Jose and Remy decided to just kind of write it off as maybe a really vivid nightmare or some sort of sleep talking situation. They were pretty skeptical, and they also didn't want to go to the police initially because they were afraid that they would sound crazy. I mean, I get it. How do you go to investigators looking into a murder and be like, "Hey, the spirit of the victim possessed me and told me who the killer is"? I'd either be worried that they would get suspicious of me or that they would think I had just lost my marbles. I mean, that's just not a scenario that you often hear about. I'm sure police get plenty of odd tips and reports, but I think that would probably take the cake. A few weeks after the initial incident, the same situation seemed to happen once again. Remy was napping when she took on a voice that was not hers. This time, she seemed really agitated and asked why Jose and Remy had not gone to the police with the information that they had been given. Jose tried to explain that they needed actual evidence in order to go to the police and be taken seriously. Remarkably, what was thought to be Teresita's spirit in Remy's body told Jose that she would offer him proof. She informed that the man who had killed her, Alan Showery, had taken jewelry from her body after he had killed her, and that if they told police, the police would find that jewelry and have the evidence that Alan Showery committed the murder. After this occurrence, Remy herself became insistent that they go to the police, and she actually confided in one of her friends about what happened. That friend had some sort of connection with the Evanston Police Department, and she called in the tip about the Chuas. The tip didn't go into full detail and didn't necessarily dive into the paranormal aspect, which I think was probably the best. I'm just not sure if the tip would have been taken seriously and followed through with if the whole scope of the situation had been detailed outright. Detective Floyd McKinney was assigned to follow through with the tip, and he paid a visit to the Chuas. The Chuas wanted to get Alan Showery's name out there after the revelation from Teresita's supposed ghost, but once again, they were worried that if they told the actual story, they wouldn't be believed and the tip would be brushed off. Because of this, they initially reported that Remy had been receiving harassing phone calls from a coworker named Alan Showery. Remy expressed that the calls seemed really creepy, angry, and aggressive, and because of the nature of the calls, she was worried that he could have had involvement in Teresita's murder. McKinney left the apartment and reported the tip to his supervisor, and that tip was then given to Chicago police as the crime was in their jurisdiction. Detective Stachula of Chicago ended up taking the tip and reached out to the Chuas to dig further. At this point, the police and detectives didn't have many leads, and the case was hitting dead end after dead end, so I'm sure that they wanted to thoroughly comb through any lead that they could. Detective Stachula paid a visit to the Chuas and was given the same story that they provided to Detective Floyd McKinney about the phone calls. Stachula noted that the Chuas seemed to appear a little nervous and closed off, and they felt that something was a little strange. He could just feel that something wasn't totally right. He noted that when they spoke of Alan Showery, Jose in particular looked really uncomfortable. Stachula decided to press them a little bit more on their story and see what they were holding back. Reluctantly, the Chuas recounted what had actually happened, Teresita possessing Remy, the dreams, and all of it. Jose expressed that Teresita, through Remy, had insisted over and over that, quote, he killed me, he killed me, he killed me, and had given the name Alan Showery. Of course, Stachula needed hard evidence because murmurs of a possession would not be held up in court. Jose relayed the information that Teresita's alleged spirit had given, that Alan Showery had stolen some of her jewelry, and they would find it with him if they investigated. This made Detective Stachula pause because one of the takeaways of the investigation into the crime scene was that it hadn't appeared that anything had been taken. To kind of push and further provide proof that what they were saying was true, Stachula asked if the ghost had mentioned if she had been sexually assaulted by Showery. Jose was adamant that she had not been, but that she was stabbed. This aligned perfectly with the condition that Teresita had been found in inside of her apartment. To push matters further, the Chuas couldn't have known any of that. The specifics of the crime scene was being kept very close to the detective's chest, as it was an ongoing investigation. The general public knew nothing of an assault or a lack thereof, or the state of Teresita. The revelations didn't end there, though. Jose went into specifics about what jewelry was stolen. There had been a jade pendant taken, as well as a pearl cocktail ring that Teresita's mother had given her. Detective Stachula took his notes and then returned to the office. I'm sure that he was feeling a little dumbfounded, maybe skeptical, maybe confused. I know I would have been, likely due to the limited amount of leads on the case and how specific that the Chuas had been in their descriptions. Stachula began to follow the lead and dig through reports of what evidence had been found at the scene of the crime. It wasn't long before Stachula came across the notepad that had the message, "Get theater tickets for AS." AS as in Alan Showery? Stachula looked into Alan Showery, and he was able to uncover a lot of information about him. He was born in New York City and studied psychology at New York University, which I found interesting. I'm always intrigued when sketchy individuals and criminals are psychology majors. I don't know, just something a little ironic about it or spooky. I don't know, I can't really explain it. Around 1969, he made the move to Chicago and worked at Edgewater Hospital, the same hospital that Remy and Teresita worked at. Interestingly enough, he also had an arrest record with reports of burglary, theft, stolen mail, and 2 different instances of rape that had also taken place around the north side of Chicago where, you guessed it, Teresita lived. All of these cases were separate too, so he had quite the lengthy record. I'm actually shocked that he was able to work in a hospital, of all places. I don't know, were background checks just not done super frequently or thoroughly in the 1960s? Not to be one of those ignorant young folk, but I don't understand how he could be eligible to work in a hospital. Now, Teresita was actually said to be pretty good friends with Alan despite his history. I can't help but feel like she had no idea about his lengthy criminal history, especially because she seemed so responsible and sensible and studious. Despite their very different backgrounds and apparent morals, they got along well. They'd often talk at work and would even ride the bus home together after their shifts. Things were reportedly purely platonic, though, and it just seemed to be this unlikely friendship match. Some of Teresita's coworkers came forward and said that she had mentioned having Alan come over to fix her TV for her, as he was quite a handyman. On the night of August 11th, Detective Statula and another officer arrived at Alan's apartment to question him, seeing as this was the only lead that they had gotten in months. Alan admitted that he did know Teresita and they were friendly with one another, but that he was not at her apartment the night that she was killed. He alleged that he'd never been to her apartment at all. He informed that he actually hadn't even seen Teresita outside of work for 6 months prior to her being killed. The officers ended up taking him in for further questioning, and this is when things began to turn. The officer said that the reason that they wanted to look into him was due to a few things that they had heard from coworkers. They had said that a few of the coworkers mentioned that he was supposed to actually go to Teresita's apartment that night to fix her TV. They also decided to kind of try to push him to the edge by telling him that they had found his fingerprints in Teresita's apartment and that they were fresher than 6 months when they had arrived to investigate the crime scene. Of course, they hadn't found fingerprints, but he didn't know that. This is when Alan Showery crumbled and kind of changed up his story, which is always such an immediate red flag to me. The moment that a person of interest backpedals and changes things up, that's always so suspicious. He confessed that actually, yes, he had seen her way more recently than the 6 months he originally claimed, and even stated that he had rode the bus home with her on the day of her disappearance. He also said that he had told her that night that he would stop by her apartment and take a look at her TV. Now, according to Alan, he didn't actually show up to her apartment that night because he was having an electrical issue at his own house and he didn't want his girlfriend to be there alone in the dark. When police tried to corroborate the story with the girlfriend by paying her a visit at their apartment, she wasn't familiar with any sort of electrical issue with their home and appeared really confused. I mean, I'm glad she was honest, but if you're trying to vouch for your man, you'd think that she would have just played along. Instead, she was like, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. Completely shredded this man's only alibi. Police also recalled that according to what the Chuas had said, that Teresita's ghost had told them, they'd find proof that Alan killed her because he'd stolen some of her jewelry. Remember, Teresita's alleged spirit had even told the Chuas what that jewelry looked like, the jade pendant and pearl cocktail ring. The detectives asked the girlfriend if they could take a look at her jewelry. She was once again confused, but she happily agreed. Honestly, at this point, props to the girlfriend for letting the police scope out her personal jewelry and debunking her own boyfriend's alibi. She is a real one, for sure. So police looked into her jewelry and didn't really see anything of that description. When they finished, they made their way back to the girlfriend and found that she was actually wearing the pearl ring. She said that it had been given to her by Alan Showery as a late Christmas present, and the police asked if they could take that ring back to the station along with the rest of her jewelry collection. She, of course, obliged, and they removed the jewelry and took it back. Eventually, one of Teresita's family members was brought in to look at the ring, and they confirmed that it was Teresita's cocktail ring, the exact one that had been given to her by her mother. Even further, within the jewelry box that the girlfriend had given up was the jade pendant that was also mentioned to be found as evidence. And you guessed it, another supposed gift from Alan. You can imagine that when the police presented to Alan what they'd found, he was panicked. At first, he tried to say that he had bought the jewelry off of some man on the street, but everyone was like, okay, no, you didn't. What's going on? Knowing that he had no way to explain himself, no alibi, he pretty immediately confessed to committing the murder. Rather than give his old story that had been debunked, Alan changed things up. He informed that he actually had gone to her apartment the night that she was killed in order to fix her TV. He said that he ended up not having the right tools, so he left and went to his apartment to retrieve them. Upon returning to her apartment, Alan said that he decided to rob her. When police questioned the sudden turn in intentions, Alan said that for some time he had been driving her around to one of her errands. I believe it was involving her trying to get citizenship, and that when he would do so, she would give him a cash tip for helping her out. Because she had always tipped him in cash, he assumed this meant that she must have more cash at her apartment. He said that he had been late on rent and was really struggling with his other bills, so this even further pressed him to do what he did. That's what just boggles my mind. If you're pressed for bills, you don't go and rob one of your good friends. You take out a loan, ask a family friend, get job part 2. I don't know why his only option was, no, I'm going to go rob my friend. Whatever, though, you really can't reason with criminals. And given his history of crimes, we probably shouldn't be surprised. Showery stated that when he arrived at Teresita's apartment again, he grabbed her and choked her until she was unconscious. While she laid on the floor, he began to pull through her apartment for money. Showery said that once he was finished looting around, he carried Teresita to her bedroom and decided to make the scene look like a sexual assault scene. He took her clothes off, grabbed a knife, and stabbed her. He said that he dragged the mattress on top of her, lit the mattress on fire, and left the scene. This is where it gets extra sad. He choked her out and did all of this and was only able to find $30 in cash, along with those jewelry pieces. Police knew that this had to be their suspect because, on top of his confession, he knew things that the public didn't know, such as what she was wearing and the state of her apartment. With confession in hand, detectives thought that they had a solid enough case to bring to court and convict Alan Showery of the crime. However, when it came to how they decided to get on his trail in the first place, they weren't sure how to tell the future jury that Teresita's spirit had spoken through Remy Chua, given the name of Alan Showery, and said that they would find proof he did it because he stole her jewelry. I mean, again, for the 500th time, it sounds pretty far-fetched. Who would really believe that? I'm sitting here covering this case decades later, and I'm struggling to fathom that. But they had to include that information. What led them to Showery being a suspect in the first place is a huge part of the journey. Now, the poor prosecutor on this case was super unsure how he could even present this. Like, he was given a tip by a ghost that started this whole thing. He said that he was pretty experienced in cases. He had been a prosecutor for a long time, and he had never, ever heard anything like this. Eventually, though, he really thoroughly looked into the case and was able to confirm that everything that had been reported was the truth. When it came to trial, Showery's lawyer tried to say that they didn't have enough evidence to convict him based on the crazy nature of how everything came to be. He went as far as to say that Remy Chua was completely lying about being possessed by Teresita because she just wanted some media attention and was super stressed from being fired from her job. I find that doubtful, especially when you see how hesitant and uncomfortable that the Chuas were to even tell the police what happened to begin with. Ultimately, the judge determined that they had taken Showery with probable cause, and despite the strange beginnings of the investigation, they had ample proof that he committed the crime. Spooky, paranormal aside, he had confessed to the murder, had some of her jewelry on him, and knew things about the crime scene, again, that the public did not know. On January 8th, 1979, Showery went to trial for the murder of Teresita Basa. The Chuas testified and told their story again, and it was determined that they had told the exact same story over and over and over again without wavering, and that really gave them a lot of credit. Despite this credit, Showery's lawyers insisted that this whole thing was based on unfounded paranormal stories, and they really highlighted the possession and the paranormal aspect of the situation. This is the part that makes me roll my eyes because, I mean, yeah, that sounds crazy. But again, we have written and verbal confession from Showery along with proof he did it. When it came to his confession, the lawyer stated that the only reason that Showery had confessed to the murders in the first place was because he wanted to protect his girlfriend and didn't want her to get arrested too. So now they're trying to backpedal his whole confession completely. Showery took back his plea of guilty and instead attempted to get a not guilty verdict. The jury deliberated for 13 hours before they told the judge that they were at a complete standstill. They were split and nobody wanted to budge from their stance. I'm sure that a lot of them were hesitant because of the controversial paranormal aspect of it all. Eventually, they were dismissed and a second trial was scheduled some weeks later with a different jury. Thankfully, this time, Showery decided to plead guilty against the advice of his lawyers as part of a plea deal for a lighter sentence. He was convicted of arson, armed robbery, and murder, and sentenced to prison for a maximum of 14 years with a minimum of 4. I was shocked that he was only sentenced for 14 years for what he did, but it seemed that the sentence leaned heavily on the armed robbery and arson, and for some reason not the murder, which I can't wrap my head around. Why do we want this person, especially with all of his past convictions, with a murder on top of it all now, to be released back into the public ever? To make matters even worse, after serving his minimum of 4 years, in 1983, Alan Showery was let out on parole. He kind of vanished into obscurity with really no news further about him. All we really seem to know is that at some point he moved to New York. Again, I'm just really appalled at how light his sentence was. I think the only reason he was let off as gently as he was is because the case had that paranormal basis that seemed really off the wall. I just wish that the paranormal beginnings had not been such a focus and that the evidence that they actually had to place him as the killer had been focused on more. Regardless, I kind of hope that he has lived a life full of Teresita haunting him. Just kidding. I guess I truly hope that she was able to rest in peace above everything else. So, what do you guys think? Do you believe that Remy was truly possessed by the spirit of Teresita? I personally don't have any explanation to debunk that. How would she have known all that she did? I thought at first that since they had been coworkers before Remy was fired, that maybe Alan had confessed something to her or she had overheard something. But then they weren't close at all. So why would he have done that? And if that was the case, why not just go to the police because you overheard something or someone confessed something to you? Why add in that paranormal aspect that looked as if it was actively making her super uncomfortable the whole time? I just don't know how else she would have known any of what she knew. And the fact that she was speaking in a voice that wasn't hers and using Teresita's locker and knew things about Teresita that a casual coworker wouldn't have known. I don't know. I just truly don't have an explanation for it. I also had the thought of, can you imagine how different this case could have gone if Alan Showery had sold the jade pendant and the ring that he'd given his girlfriend? I'm actually surprised that he didn't do that, considering his reason for looting her apartment was because he was broke. If he had sold that jewelry, they probably wouldn't have had the grounds to continue looking into him because that jewelry was really a lot of the proof, and the discovery of it is really what made Showery pivot to begin with. Looking back, this really does seem to be a case of a spirit coming forth to bring her killer to justice. This case is truly so unique. Before researching into this, I had never heard of anything like it. I am a self proclaimed true crime enthusiast, and I know a lot about plenty of different cases, but for me, this was the first of its kind. I would love to know what you all think of this case. Do you believe it? Do you have an idea that could explain it away? Are you as shaken up about it as I am? Please feel free to send me a message or drop a comment on any of the podcast's social media. My main hub is a Facebook page under the name Cryptids and Cases. You can also find me on Instagram under the same name or Twitter/X under the username Cryptids, capital N Cases. If you don't mind, please follow those social medias, and wherever you are listening, it would help out loads if you would subscribe, download the episode, follow, like the episode, rate it, or whatever applies to the platform that you're watching it on. It helps me reach more people and really, really helps the podcast a lot. Thank you so much for listening, guys. Your support means the absolute world to me, and I could not be more grateful to have the support system that I do. Join me next episode for our newest cryptid feature, and until then, I will love you and leave you here. Bye, guys.